All right, today we're going to be talking about something that I hear people asking about quite often, which is how to take MIDI drums and make them sound like actual live recorded drums. It's a great time to be making music because with amp sims and plugins like Serum and certainly drum VSTs, if you're a guitarist or you play one instrument, you can really fill out an entire band yourself in your bedroom. So that's really exciting. The problem is that if everyone's doing it the same way, and in particular using the same VST drum plugins like Superior Drummer 3, Easy Drummer, and so on, and they're not taking extra steps on the processing, they all wind up with really mechanical, really robotic, like too perfect to be human sounding drum beats. And that is something that you can hear like immediately in a lot of modern metal production. So it's really key, in my opinion, to create a live drum sound even when you're using MIDI drums. And there's a couple very straightforward techniques that you can use to do that. So let's listen to a snippet of a song with no drums on it, and then I'm going to show you all those techniques step by step. And I'm going to be doing this in Superior Drummer 3 today, but just so you know, everything that I'm doing here today, you can do in Easy Drummer and all the other drum VSTs largely the same way. So here's a portion of a song with all the drums removed.
Monsters, shadows, angels of rot, an empty vessel, the way you want it done.
All right, and what we're going to want to do here is do some kind of dynamic shifts in a drum beat so that we can play with really enabling that dynamic range and differences in terms of how hard the drumsticks are hitting the drums, also differences in the actual timing of the drums. Humans don't play perfectly, and MIDI drums are perfect. So what we're going to do is take something perfect and make it imperfect step by step. So the first thing is, and all drum plugins have this, you want to make sure that you're on multi-output, not on stereo. And what this means is that you can mix every piece of the drum kit independently in your DAW rather than relying on the in-app mixing board. And this to me is really important. So we're going to pop that open. The reason I love Superior Drummer 3, I think it's by far the best drum VST plugin. And it also gives you a lot of freedom to do a lot of different and cool things. So before we really get into, writing the drum part and then processing it, let's make sure we have the right drums. There's an expansion pack for Superior Drummer 3 called Death and Darkness, and it's got some really great presets. So in Death, for instance, where is it? Yeah, you can get like the cattle decapitation drum kit, right? It's got a bunch of stuff like this. It's really cool. This drum kit might be fine. Let's take a listen here. I don't want that much pop on my snare, so I'm going to grab a Black Beauty instead. Black Beauty's kind of my go-to. All right, we got our drum kit. The very next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the mixer and I'm going to remove all of the in-app processing. Most of the VST plugins have in-app processing like this. And if you pick a preset like I just did, you'll see there's EQ, there's a transient shaper here, there's some compression here. I don't like using any of this stuff. I like to turn it all off so that I'm starting with a raw drum kit, which is what you would be starting with if you were recording live drums. So I'm replicating the process of recording live drums using MIDI. These here that I'm turning off, these are the buses. So you can see you have like a hi-hat bus, you have the toms bus to one auxiliary channel. We're just going to turn all that off because I want to do all that myself in the DAW, which again is what I would be doing if I was mixing these drums live. So let's go ahead and just write a simple drum part for this portion. And we're actually going to write one first, just so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to do quarter note triplets here. I'm just going to draw some kick out there. Okay, let's do the same thing with the snare. Let's zoom in here. I'm just going to throw some snares out there. You can already hear as I'm clicking this, every single hit sounds exactly the same. That's what we got to fix, right? You can also use MIDI grooves for this. We'll do that in a second, just so I can kind of show you the range. But Superior Drummer 3 is cool because you can just like draw this stuff on. It's very user-friendly, pretty easy to get your head around. And it doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to kind of like soup it up later. Okay, let's give it some hats. Actually, that's not what I want to do. Let's get rid of all that. I want to do this. I'm just going to create kind of a classic mellow death beat here. There we go. So we'll get that hi-hat open, and it's going to start to sound a little more mellow deathy. Oops. Okay. All right, let's get all these guys. Sounds like we're running out of processing. Let me turn off the mix bus processing here so we don't get any glitchiness. Fun part of doing these things with no edits. All right, there's our basic beat. Let's let's throw some crash in there so it sounds like a beat that a drummer would actually play. And we're not going to go crazy. We can add fills and stuff like that later. We're just going to get kind of a core beat down here. And just for the sake of demonstration, let's pick a beat that requires a different level of dynamics for the next part of this. So we got our first part here. And then when we get halfway through it, I think I'm going to kick this into high gear with a blast beat right about there. So I'm going to grab a MIDI groove for that. MIDI grooves are a really nice part of the process. And the reason I like MIDI grooves is what they are is they're preset MIDI loops that you can just plug into any VST. And the reason they're nice is because they're usually originally recorded by a human who's using different velocities because humans play differently with their hands and who might not always be perfectly on beat. That's a good thing. The whole goal of this is to, really play imperfectly, right? So let's see if we can find a good blast beat here. Might use that one just for the sake of simplicity. Let me just see if I find one I like better. Let's see how that does. All right, seems good enough. Let's just hear it all together. All right, that's fine. Okay, so now we have our drums in here, but they're perfect, especially the part that I just drew on. So let's start to focus on making them imperfect. And I like to do this before any processing. I really like to get as close as I can to an actual live recorded drum take before I put any processing on it, because if you start with the processing, you're probably going to over process it, right? So I'm going to go back into this view where I have the individual hits laid out. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the time imperfect. So I'm going to select the area that I want to focus on. And in Superior Drummer 3, there's this randomize slider. So what this is doing is this is at random shifting the timing of these hits. And I find that the amount of randomization that really starts to feel human is right around 11 or 12. So let's play this, and you're going to notice that it's not perfectly on beat, but that's actually a good thing. That's what it sounds like, really extreme. Let's just dial that back to a nice... All right, so now we're getting kind of human imperfection in the timing. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create human imperfection in the velocity. So these little lines here, these are showing the velocity of the drum hit. As you can see, we're hitting it at 100% velocity every time, which is not the way that any real drummer plays ever. If you look at the MIDI groove that I added, you can see that this already has some velocity changes and therefore some dynamic changes. Again, that's because that was recorded live. If you're not working with MIDI grooves, by the way, you should get loud stacked MIDI grooves. I think they're the best. Then this is what you do. So this top randomizer, we've randomized the timing of the hits. Now we're going to randomize the velocity. And I'll usually bring this to 12 to 15, somewhere around there. Might drop the velocity a little bit so that we don't have the hardest hits known to man happening all the time. And I think you're really going to notice this on the snare. So let's do the same thing with the snare hits. They're already randomized in terms of time. Let's randomize them in terms of velocity. Now they're hitting the way that humans actually hit, right? We're going to do the same thing with the hi-hats. Yeah, you can be even crazier with the randomization here if you really want to hear it. All right, we're getting a lot closer to human. I'm even going to exaggerate the timing randomization a little bit more just for effect. With black metal, with death metal, I really like it to be noticeable that we're not perfectly on beat. That's why I love bands like Blood Incantation. They have very human performance. Okay, so we have our bass beats. Let's hear the blast beat sounding. Okay. So now we have the drum kit we like. We've removed all the processing from the drum kit. We've randomized the timing and also the velocity of the beats, and we're starting to get a lot closer to a raw human recorded drum kit. The next thing to do here is to create realistic bleed. So one of the problems with VST drums is they're perfect in that they remove all bleed completely. You can hear a snare drum hit without picking up any bleed from the hi-hat cymbal or from the kick drum, but that's not how real drums sound, right? So I like to enable a little bit of bleed here. I'm going to pick all the mics that are on my different kick drums, and I'm going to let some of the snare bleed in. I'll let some of the hi-hat bleed in, and maybe just the rest of the shells. We'll let some of the tom bleed in here too. I'm going to dial it back so it's not super aggressive, but it's there. And the reason I like it there is because it really helps the drums sound like they're in the room together as opposed to being, recorded independently. So let's see what it sounds like with just the kick enabled. That's where we enabled the bleed. It's not going to let me do that because obviously now the snare isn't playing. So we'll have to listen to it in context, but I'm going to clear this. I'm going to do the same thing on the snares. I'm going to let the snares pick up some of the toms, and I'm also going to give them a little cymbal noise. The top mic might be getting some of that in the room. Let's give it some crash, and I'm going to pull these guys way down. And when you get over to the overhead mics, so where the chinas and the splashes are and just the broader overheads in the room, these are absolutely going to be picking up bleed. I don't like to hit it hard on the kick. I do like there to be some snare. I like the cymbals and the toms all to kind of bleed with each other because it creates that room effect that I was describing earlier. So I'm just going to quickly do these. And you can be very meticulous with this, obviously, if you want to. I'm just recording a video, so I'm going to move fast. So we got some bleed there. I'm going to do the same thing for the room mics. And I like having a decent amount of cymbal in the room mic because then when you smash it, it really forces that cymbal sound to the forefront. It brings some, ambience to the drum kit that you wouldn't organically get if you just used a VSC drum kit the way that it is right out of the box. All right, so we've now enabled some bleed across these different mics. It's not going to be extremely obvious yet, but it will be in just a minute. So drum kit set up, mics are set up, and we've now basically successfully replicated a live recorded drum kit with no processing. Now, we're going to need to process this to really flesh out the room sound. And this is the beauty of kind of the multi-output setup. So as I'm clicking here, I'm adding different channels for these different portions of the drum. So we got the snare, we got the hi-hat, we got the toms. That's so annoying how Logic does that. Let's go back to the kit. And what you're going to want to do is route these not to the stock, kick output that's here, because that's just going to be sending it over here to the buses that live in the app. Instead, you want to send it to the actual outs that you're creating. So what I did by clicking that plus sign is I created new auxiliary send channels in Logic. And what I'm doing now is I'm sending all of my kick drums to stereo out 1 and 2. I'm sending all my snare drums to stereo out 3 and 4. And so you can cross-reference that. If I click on the snare auxiliary channel here, you'll see that it is receiving as an input Superior Drummer 3 and 4. And I'm going to do that quickly here. I'll put all the toms on 1 just to kind of move this thing along. The hi-hat going out to 5/6. All of the toms going to 7/8. And I know this is probably boring to watch, but this is maybe the single most important step that you can take in creating an authentic drum sound. So I'm going to group all the overhead mics together on one auxiliary send. Ordinarily, I might actually send those to different places, but again, I don't want to bore you guys while I go through this. And then we'll send all the room mics to out 11 and 12. So now we're going to just keep clicking on the plus sign here until we get to out 11 and 12. There we go. So now we have the snare, the hi-hat, we'll have a close mic there, all the close mics for the toms, all of the overhead mics, and all of the room mics. So now this is, bussed and sent the way that I would if I was doing live drums, right? So I would maybe process the snare, top and bottom mic slightly differently, but I'm going to send them to a snare bus and then I'm going to process that. That's what I just did here by using that multi-output option. So now I'm going to right click on these, at least in Logic, and I'm going to create an actual track in my project for each of these drum pieces. So if I did that right, we'll see, there we go. We got sound coming from all of the different buses. We only are not seeing toms because there's no toms in this part. So what I'm going to do now that I have my drum kit set up, I have it routed correctly. You can see step by step, we've replicated how I would do this with a live drum kit. I'm going to relabel this as kick. Now I'm going to go ahead and process the drums. So I have other videos for this. I'm going to move quickly through it and we'll throw some EQ on the kick. Let's cut the rumble, maybe boost the chest a little bit. Give it a little click over here, dip like that. And since you're not using the in-app processing, don't be shy about going kind of crazy here. Like, normally people don't do wild EQ moves like this in tutorials. I think it's great though. If it sounds good in the song, go for it. So let's hear the whole song with just the kick and then we'll EQ there a little bit.
Monsters, shadows, angels of rot, an empty vessel, the way you want it.
Okay, so the next thing is the compression, and this is really, really, really important to creating what sounds like a live drum kit. If you slam the compression on your individual drum pieces, it's all going to be super flat. It's going to sound mechanical. It's going to be obvious that it's MIDI. So instead of, a lot of producers might target like 10 or 12 decibels of gain reduction in the compression for something like the kick drum. I'm only going to target 3 to 5. I'm going to give it relatively fast attack, just enough to get the transient, probably a middle release. Let's hear that.
Monsters, shadows, angels of rot, an empty vessel, the way you want.
So what I like about that is you can still hear some of the dynamics happening, right? So let's do the same thing with the snare. I'm going to move quickly through EQ again since we have that.
Monsters, shadows, angels of rot, an empty vessel, the way you want it. That I don't believe it wasn't me.
Okay. I'm going to actually go ahead and make my drum bus now so it's easy to solo the drum bus. And we are going to mix this solo, even though you're not really supposed to, just so you can hear what's happening. So I'm going to add some compression here on the snare. And again, I'm going to be gentle with this. I'm not going to slam it at, 10 to 12 decibels gain reduction. I'm going to look for 3 to 5.
Monsters, shadows, angels of rot, an empty vessel, the way you want it.
And you can hear that it sounds human, right? Every hit is not the same. So let's go through the rest of these. I'm generally not going to compress the cymbals or the overheads at all. Just throw some EQ on there. Okay. Just cut where the harsh sound is. Okay, and we're going to throw an air shelf on the cymbals, something I really like to do. This is another trick that I think does bring some live sound. The Mag EQ4 air shelf is the best one. What we're doing is we're boosting the high frequencies on the cymbals, 1 to maybe 2 decibels at 10,000 hertz or maybe even 20,000 hertz. And that's going to give us a sheen on the cymbal that really sounds like you're standing in front of the cymbal, like you're in the room watching the band, as opposed to listening to a MIDI drum kit. Yep, looking for that sizzle right there. We put that on all of our overheads. And all I did there was I just bust the hi-hat together with the overhead mics. Now the rooms, this is another area that's extremely important to creating a live sounding drum kit. I like to be heavy with the room mics, like getting room sound into the drum kit is going to really glue it together and make it sound like all the drums are in the same room. I think people tend to be a little too shy with the room mic. So let's just throw light EQ here to take out rumble, dip where we have boxiness, and just see what that sounds like. That sounds like real room mics to me. It's pretty wild what you can do now in Superior Drummer. Get that out of there. All right. Now I'm going to slam the compression on the room mics because that really brings them to the forefront, which brings glue to the drum kit and gives it more of a live quality. So I'm fine with 10 decibels of gain reduction. I'm going to go all the way at a 20-to-1 ratio here. Faster attack. If you want really aggressive rooms, then you can even add some saturation here, and you could use something crazy like Decapitator. Let's just throw that on and see what it sounds like. That's certainly crazy. A little darker, a little less. All right, cool. Now let's hear what the whole drum kit sounds like together. And we're gonna level. So first I'm gonna level the kick and the snare. And what I'm looking for here is, probably somewhere at peaking at maybe -6 decibels, maybe -3 decibels on the fader. Bring the snare a little bit lower than that. Toms we're not hearing right now, but I know how I'd process them. I'd probably just cut the rumble, dip somewhere around here. We're moving fast, right? And, I'd throw some compression on those toms too, but we're not focusing on how to process drums perfectly. We're really just focused on how to make MIDI drums sound real. So here it is all together. Now, I like to be pretty hot on the overheads so the cymbals are in your face, and I like to be pretty hot on the rooms. So if we look at this, that's kind of where conventional wisdom would tell you to put the room mics, like -24 decibels. I like to really bring that up. You can see if you can hear in your headphones, what that's doing is it's making these drums sound live. Okay, so we're getting closer. Now we've got our individual tracks processed with the general processing effects. We've got some rough leveling. I'd probably tinker with this a little bit more. Bring that down a little. Whatever, roughly, right? So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start to do some parallel sends. And this is where you have an opportunity to add an additional layer of glue to make it sound like these drums are in the same room. So I'm going to do a send. So I'm going to create an auxiliary send for reverb, and I'm going to send all of the shells. So the kick drums, the toms, and the snare to the same reverb send, which in essence is putting them in the same room, right? I'm going to use Valhalla Vintage Burb. You can use, stock reverb if you want. I just like this preset in here. Where is it? Exciting Snare Room. I like this one for all the shells. And so I'm just going to give a little bit of kick in there. I'm going to be more heavy-handed with the snare. And we're going to put the toms in there too. And now they're going to kind of get an extra layer of cohesion because they're all being processed exactly the same way on this send by the same reverb. If you want to, you can send the cymbals there too. I usually don't, but we'll just do it here because why not? And so to my ears, that sounds a lot more like a drum kit already, and we still have some more work to do, but I think we're on the right track here. So now let's talk about bus processing. So I have all of my individual buses, snare, kick, overheads, rooms. Those are all going to one big drum bus. I'm going to just use some EQ to take out some rumble, fix any problem frequencies here. Okay, now just like we did with the reverb send, we're going to apply processing at the bus level that's going to even glue these things together further. My favorite bus compressor is the API 2500, and I like to be very gentle on my bus compression, which again is not usually what you hear in modern music. So this is usually what you would hear. Let's slam it. You probably hear something like that. Now, listening to that, though, we've lost a lot of the dynamics. The hit, all that work we did to make the hits different velocities, it's all starting to sound the same again. And that's the problem that we want to solve. So I'm going to use the old tone type setting, which is gentler, the normal thrust detection, and the soft knee. These are much softer compression settings. And then I'm going to give this the longest attack and the shortest release. And I'm going to put my compression ratio at 2 or 3 to 1, not at 4. And I'm really only going to look for like 2 decibels of gain reduction here. So let's dial that in. Because I really want those transients coming through. Let's hear it in context. Okay. The rest of these probably should come down a little bit just so we can hear those drums. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do, which I love doing, is I'm going to throw a little tape saturation on this. My favorite tape saturation for the drum bus is Sketch Cassette 2. I've made a setting that I like for this project already. And I'm using the Type 2 tapes, so the second most modern tape style, and I have it at mastering quality. I'm doing some noise reduction compensation here. So one of the beautiful things about tape saturation is it gives you that gooey tape sound. I did a video on tape saturation separately, and this is going to just pop those drums into higher definition. So let me show you what it looks like off, and then I'll turn it on. This is going to glue it into the mix even more and really bring more of the organic drum sound to this song. I also don't mind clipping this plugin. I actually think it sounds more organic and more natural. See that? That sounds like very much like a live drum to me. And the very last thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to add one more send for reverb now at the bus level. So we have sends happening on the shells themselves, and we have a separate send now to a separate reverb channel that's happening at the bus level. And this I would use an ambience style reverb, something very subtle. They have a preset here that I really like called Drum Air. I'm just going to dial this up a little bit in the context of the mix, and it should really glue in nicely here. All right, so kind of quick and dirty, but let's listen to it on its own now. Compared to where we started, that really does sound like live drums to me, like we're in the room. So what did we do? We picked the right drum kit. We focused time and effort there to make sure that we're picking the right drum kit. The next thing that we did is we removed all of the processing from all the drums, all the bells and whistles they put in these plugins to make the drum sound good, in my opinion, make the drum sound fake. So we got rid of all of those. The next thing we did is we randomized the timing of the hits. So we added some human imperfection to when the drums are getting hit. After that, we randomized the velocity of the hits so that we get some human hits on the drums. Not every hit is exactly the same. After that, we split this thing out into the multi-outputs so that we could create an actual track in the project for each individual drum. Then we processed those drums, and in terms of creating live sound, the next thing we did is we added sends so that we were sending all of the shells to the same reverb room. We then bussed it, we added some compression and tape saturation, and then we sent that entire bus to another reverb room. The last thing that I would say is, once again, you want to be really gentle with the processing. Most modern metal producers are really heavy-handed. They're so heavy-handed that you lose the dynamics, you lose everything that makes the hits unique, and you lose the ability for the drums to sound like a human being is playing them. So hopefully you got something from that. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions on how to process MIDI drums. That's my approach. I like it. I think it sounds like I'm standing in the room with the band, and that for me is always the goal. All right, see you next time.